against terror. That's our In Focus tonight. India's firm resolve against terror. And to talk about that, I'm joined by Prabhu Dayal, former senior diplomat and retired Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain. He is a former co-commander of the 15 Corps. Thank you both gentlemen for joining me on the show. First to you, Ambassador. The Home Minister says today that it's not time now for talks. It is time to reciprocate. That's a very strong statement. Why did the Home Minister choose to make this statement at this juncture, and what could one make of this statement?
You know, for several decades, Pakistan has pursued a policy of waging proxy war against India by using terrorists who are from non-state terror organizations. The ISI, which is the intelligence wing of the Pakistan Army, has been training, financing, and arming such terrorists and then infiltrating them into India to carry out proxy warfare. Now, I was posted in Pakistan during the 80s when Ziaul Haq was president, and this strategy was really perfected during his time. Zia realized that India was militarily much stronger and Pakistan could not fight a frontal war against its neighbor. So therefore he perfected this strategy of sending terrorists across to wage proxy war. There are various organizations which are involved, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Hizbul Mujahideen. Now all along India had been trying to coax Pakistan to give up this policy, but only in recent years, India has begun to hit back with force in order to make Pakistan realize the policy of trying to wage terrorist acts against India. Now, India, for instance, conducted the surgical strike on September 29 in 2016 across the line of control, which was a response to a terrorist attack on an army base in the Uri sector of Jammu and Kashmir. Again, the Balakot strike was conducted by India on 26 February in response to the Pulwama attack, in which 46 CRPF personnel were killed and for which the Jaish-e-Mohammed had claimed responsibility. So India has shown that it will hit back if Pakistan launches terrorist attacks against it. Now, recently, there has been a spate of such terrorist incidents. As it is, the month of October, as General Atta Hasnain will bear me out, is when the ISI tries to infiltrate as many terrorists as possible into India, because later on, with the onset of winter, it would become a little more difficult to do so. So it is really in October that Pakistan tries to infiltrate terrorists, and frankly, this was expected by India. And we witnessed a number of counter-terror measures which India took, counter-terror operations in which Pakistani terrorists were gunned down. So in terms of the timing, well, there are various factors. First of all, to make Pakistan realize that India will not sit back, that India will hit back with greater force, and that it will not just be a simple tit for tat, but it will be much bigger than that, and Pakistan will be hurt very badly as it was earlier during the surgical strike and the Balakot strike. And as I said, the month of October is when this message needs to be sent out very effectively, and India has done so both through the Home Minister and the Defense Minister. So I think that the timing is, in terms of the overall scenario and in terms of the experience in earlier years.
Okay. General Hasnain, Ambassador Dayal says that, October is when we see the infiltration increase. You've been the co-commander of the 15 Corps. You've served in the valley. While that is true, but, this statement by the Home Minister, in your opinion, what sort of an effect would it have across the border?
Thank you for that question, and I also was to thank Ambassador Prabhu Dayal for having laid out the context beautifully. I think he's given the backdrop extremely well, and he's brought it up to the context of the times today. I agree with him. October is a period, October, November is a period of high intensity activity on the line of control normally. But this year, the situation is a little beyond that. Afghanistan, with what is happening there, the gravitation of terrorist groups which is taking place there, and Pakistan's obvious advantage which it has gained there, has given it a fillip as far as this motivation, morale, inspiration is concerned. That inspiration has also traveled across into different parts. Those following the ideology of political Islam are feeling a high at this particular moment. And therefore, there is a lurking thought that this is the ideal time to actually target India and sort of calibrate the original strategy which Pakistan had laid out in the early 80s, which is exactly what Ambassador Prabhu Dayal was referring to. Now, I think this is particularly the situation in the valley at the moment, the targeting of extremely soft targets, which is a very expected thing. Attempts at infiltration, attempts at trying to fill up the valley with more foreign terrorists, at the same time, and trying to push back against the efforts of the state in trying to neutralize the various networks, the overground worker networks which are in place there. I think this is a very appropriate time that very deliberately the Home Minister and the Defense Minister, both of them, and in addition the External Affairs Minister, are putting together a communication package to Pakistan that enough is enough. Do not get over enthusiastic with this. You may have gained a marginal success in Afghanistan as per your strategic perception, but you try and turn this around and target our country, target India, we will reciprocate. Now, it's a good thing that the Home Minister has not specifically mentioned anything, what India could intend to do, etc. But he said very clearly, this is not the time for talks. Talks are behind us, but you hit us, we are going to hit you back. And the message should be very clear that we are going to hit you back very hard. I think this is a very appropriate time to say that, appropriate time to do the right communication. Because Pakistan is feeling emboldened, and we cannot allow the elements in Pakistan to feel emboldened by this. Because if that happens, then the situation in the Kashmir Valley, with the kind of activities going on at the moment, can go out of hand.
Okay. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, was the Home Minister speaking to Pakistan and Pakistan alone, or was he speaking to the larger world?
Well, of course, the Home Minister was speaking to the larger world too. But one cannot forget the fact that terrorist acts are carried out by Pakistan against India, and therefore his message was addressed in particular to Pakistan. And the General is absolutely right. The Afghanistan situation will now compound the problem because Pakistan has more such people available to it who are its human resources for targeting India. There are lots of militants who are now free from waging warfare in Afghanistan. Moreover, it has its own personnel who were involved directly in Afghanistan, and they are also more free to carry out activities against India. So the Afghanistan situation certainly compounds the problem, as I said, and the message needed to be sent, and indeed the message has been sent. Now, whether Pakistan heeds the message or not is a separate issue, because Pakistan has shown that somehow it is going to carry out terrorism against India, even at the cost of hurting itself. Pakistan has been repeatedly hurt when India in the last few years carried out counter-terror operations, but somehow that doesn't seem to have changed Pakistan's approach, because this whole strategy of carrying out proxy warfare or terrorist warfare against India is fundamental to Pakistan's policy. It is a state policy which Pakistan has adopted. Of course, I hope that given the overall global pressure on Pakistan, there will be some realization, because Pakistan is on the FATF grey list. The United States has also said that it will work with India in the context of listing of terrorists. So there is increasing pressure on Pakistan. But whether it heeds this pressure remains to be seen. In my view, terrorism is too firmly ingrained in Pakistan's state policy, and we cannot expect an overnight change. We will have to be prepared to give it back to Pakistan, and I'm sure that our forces are prepared in that context.
Okay. And General Hussain, then let me ask this, that is that a strategy that will work in your view with Pakistan? You know, it is so steeped in their foreign policy. Their country is driven, their foreign policy at least is driven, and to a large extent their domestic policy also, by countering India or trying to, you know, become a rival to India, match India. It's a very India obsessive policy that they follow. So if that is what it's founded on, will it yield much result?
I think it will.
Okay.
And I'll tell you my rationale for it. You must remember that the strategy which Pakistan follows against India, which was evolved in the 80s in the time of Ziaul Haq, essentially is a strategy of hybrid war, which combines different domains of the conflict spectrum and puts it together in what is called a war for 1,000 cuts, to impose 1,000 cuts on India. One of the things it relies on, and this is very important, what it relies on is that it will continue to work, it will continue to target as per this, the situation being below India's threshold of tolerance. Now, it's very difficult to calibrate a nation's threshold of tolerance. India's threshold of tolerance in the 80s, the 90s, maybe the early part of the millennium was something. But thereafter, it has been demonstrated very clearly at least twice, in 2016 and in 2019, that that threshold of tolerance has come a couple of notches, if not many notches below. And therefore, if Pakistan chooses to calibrate its strategy, it may just actually cross the threshold of tolerance much before, with small acts. It's not necessary to kill 40 Indian soldiers or 20 Indian soldiers to instigate India to actually launch a response. It could be with 3, 4 or 5 soldiers, or just with minority killings in the Kashmir Valley. Now, this message must remain an obfuscated message. It cannot be specific to putting it down to the number of people we lose or the kind of nature of action which has taken place. It should be clear that India will not tolerate a terrorist attack. We will not speak, we will not talk, we will only act. And let that threshold of tolerance be absolutely vague, grey, hazy. This is the only way Pakistan will ensure. It will have to bring down its overall strategic concept of being able to think that it can work, deny, remain in a state of denial, and act as if it can do it below India's threshold of tolerance.
So is that policy workable? Israel has adopted that policy. I don't see attacks coming from the Palestinians on the Israelis going down.
No, well, I can tell you this, it happens in spurts. There was a time when Israel was being subjected to attacks from both sides, from the West Bank and from Gaza. And why not from the north, from Lebanon, by the Hezbollah? I mean, Israel was under complete pressure from all directions. And the situation is quite different today. The ability to calibrate and hit back did have its effect. And it's happened in Gaza each time. Although I know, I'm fully aware of the fact that in Gaza it does emerge every other time. It happens because the aspect of keeping themselves relevant is very important to the Palestinians too. But the Israeli system of hitting back has had its effect, definitely.
Okay.
And in this case, you have to remember that as far as Israel is concerned, I mean, the difference between Israel and the Palestinians is a Goliath and a David. Here, India and Pakistan are two reasonably large countries. We've got a large army. Their army is just half the size of our army. It's not such a small army either. So it's important for us to be able to put together this package. It's a question of a demonstrable package, which should have a serious content, and communication strategy in this is very, very important. It's not just only the Home Minister and the Foreign Minister or the Defense Minister who must speak. This must be spoken by our think tanks. It must be spoken by our strategic analysts. It must be spoken by our media. It's so important to put this package together.
Okay. Ambassador Prabhudeal, let me give you the last word on this, because my producer tells me I'm completely running out of time. Even the Prime Minister, when he was virtually addressing the Extraordinary Leaders Summit of the G20 3 days back, he did raise the issue of radicalization, of terrorism. The External Affairs Minister brought it up at Nur Sultan, going to the extent of saying that cross-border terrorism is not statecraft. It is terrorism by another name. The Defense Minister spoke today, the Home Minister spoke. So as India speaks at various fora, the G20 is coming up in Rome. As India speaks at various international fora, is the world buying that narrative, one? And secondly, even if the world is, will it do something about it, or it is each country to its own?
Well, first of all, the world is realizing more than ever that Pakistan is a nerve center of terrorism, and that is why Pakistan has been placed in the grey list by the Financial Action Task Force.
Okay.
If this were not the case, then Pakistan would have exited the grey list already, but it has not been able to do so. Secondly, more and more countries have begun to caution Pakistan about the fact that it faces a boycott because of the nature of its involvement with terrorism. For instance, New Zealand and England didn't send their cricket teams. Why? It was all related to Pakistan's image as a terrorist state. Now, what is the difference between what India had been doing in the past and what India is doing now? Well, in the past too, India had been cautioning Pakistan and had been trying to apprise the world opinion about Pakistan's involvement in terror. But the difference that now Pakistan is being hit by India across the line of control in retaliation for its terrorist activities. Now, this had not been happening earlier. As I mentioned earlier, the surgical strike and the Balakot strike are clear examples of the fact that India is willing to go across the line of control and hit Pakistan if Pakistan does not desist from waging terrorist activities against India. And this fundamental shift has had a great impact on Pakistan. I think it is beginning to realize that the price it has to pay is increasing.
Okay.
But whether it will stop waging terrorist acts against India remains to be seen. The problem, as I mentioned earlier, is that terrorism is very, very intricately woven into Pakistan's state policy. And it is not going to be easy for Pakistan to wean itself away from the terrorist organizations and vice versa. Because the terrorist organizations are handmaidens of the ISI, and their operations are controlled by the ISI, and therefore these terrorist organizations cannot be unemployed. Otherwise, they will start hitting targets within Pakistan itself. So that's a dilemma for Pakistan, and for this reason, it may find it difficult to distance itself from these terrorist organizations.
So the only, so the Indian strategy would be to raise the costs. Now the big question is whether those costs would be prohibitive for Pakistan or not. As you say, you believe that Pakistan is sort of, now become a captive of its own policy where it can't come out of it. Ambassador Prabhudeal, General Syed Hasnain, thank you very much for joining me on the show tonight and lending us your insights. Thank you. And moving on, India on Thursday once again slammed China for